This is What If I Told You, the event psychology video podcast for event professionals in which Victoria WIITY, event consultant and host, talks with the world's top minds in behavioral science, neuroscience, and psychology on how to transform events using insights about human behavior and mind. For more science-based tips, join Event Psychology Club at eventpsychology.gumroad.com. Also, check out Victoria's online course, Event Psychology Lab, at eventpsychology.thinkific.com, which covers key behavioral science concepts and offers research-backed solutions to your event challenges. This course is a unique opportunity to upgrade your industry skills and gain a competitive edge without adding to your already busy schedule. Now, enjoy the conversation.
Hello, I'm Victoria WIITY, and this is What If I Told You, the event psychology podcast where I talk all things event psychology, that is how to apply brain science insights in events. Today I'm chatting with Lorraine D'Arcy. Dr. Lorraine D'Arcy is Sustainability Action Research and Innovation Lead at Technological University Dublin, where she's putting her academic knowledge into action, working with the university's sustainability team to meet their aim of carbon neutrality by 2040. She is a senior lecturer in sustainable transport and mobility, a civil engineer with a PhD in exercise and environmental psychology, which focused on how streets, neighborhood design, and social determinants influence our transport and health behaviors. And Lorraine was conference lead for Walk21 Ireland, the international conference on walking and livable communities hosted in September this year. Welcome, Lorraine. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me, Victoria.
I'm so excited about what we are going to discuss today, and a short story of how I met Lorraine. First of all, I came across the event itself, the conference, and I found it very exciting. And so that's how I found out about Lorraine's work. So, Lorraine, you work in the field of sustainable transport and mobility. And in particular, you provide findings from behavioral science and environmental psychology to engineers and city planners, right? And that somehow reminds me of what I try to focus on in my work, marrying psychology and events. And so I'd like to hear your take on why do you think it's important that people from outside of psychology incorporate that knowledge into their work?
So I suppose fundamentally everything is about behavior, isn't it? Whether, we're talking about marketing, no matter what we're talking about, there's a psychological element to it, and it fundamentally results in behavior. And as a civil engineer that was working in transportation planning, this was something that was not addressed in my undergraduate training, my postgraduate training, even in work. It was engineers making decisions and planners making decisions about how they think people should do things. And like my professional career, then, I took a little hop across into working in sport and physical activity promotion and health. And that was not a surprise to people who knew me because I was a voluntary director of one of Ireland's largest children's sports organizations. So it was just this opportunity to sidestep in my career, but actually opened up a perspective that I hadn't really considered up until I started doing a PhD on walkability. And then it was actually thinking about how do different professions approach the subject? How did they communicate with each other? And how do they consider the person and the place? So I suppose the exercise psychology, as we say, and then the environmental psychology, the perception of place. And it's just really interesting that different professions put a different weight on different elements. And we think that we're all talking about the same thing, but we use different terminology, we focus on different things, we talk at each other, but not necessarily to each other. So along with colleagues, I went back teaching in civil engineering, the academic life, you have to find where am I going to get tenure, and it goes back to your primary degree. And, one of the first things that we did along with my colleagues, I was in civil engineering department, my colleagues in the planning department, was we set up a master's in sustainable transport and mobility. And the very first module that those students take, and it's an multidisciplinary master's, you don't have to have a background in engineering or planning to take this master's, because which reflects the myriad of like professions that it is relevant to. But the very first module that they take is behavior change. And it's always so interesting, particularly the engineers will say that, oh, behavior change and urban design, why do we have to do these? They're not relevant to us. And again, it's that psychology. They think that psychology isn't relevant to them, but the feedback time and time again is they were the two most influential modules that they took. So, the Walk21 conference, like I've been to it a number of times. I first went to it in New York, I think it was 2008, 2009. And I remember just being blown away by the fact that here was this conference that was, while there was academics there, it was not academic focused as such. It talked about the application of theory. It talked about what practitioners were doing. It was around a community of people who were interested in walking and how to communicate that. And it was like, it was a real dream of mine to bring that to Ireland, because we do have a very ambitious program for government. The event was sponsored by the Government of Ireland. Across 3 different government departments. We have an ambition for both physical activity and health and for active transport to increase walking. But I was like, look, let's bring this community and let's see how we can actually get people talking together a bit better or have a common frame of reference. And that was the key focus of the event.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This is super interesting. So I love that, you refer to how feedback about the modules on psychology differs from the initial perception by the students, right? So I think that's the case, in many situations, in our jobs as well. And I certainly find it true for the event professionals, for the event industry, because people initially think that, it's a no-brainer and it's not that, relevant or exciting or important. And then when they dig deeper, they realize the how powerful that knowledge is and how things change dramatically when psychology knowledge is applied to their jobs. So you research environment, and I'd like to ask you about the impact of the environment on human behavior and well-being.
Yeah. It's so fascinating that actually today, over the last 2 days, I have been feeding into policy development in Ireland and Europe. Actually, today it was the European Green Deal we were talking about, and yesterday it was the our Sustainable Transport and Mobility and Climate Action Plan. And it's just so interesting in the room that when we bring it back to the conversations about people and place, whether we're talking about, any type of transportation planning, any type of planning, it fundamentally comes back to people, how they feel, and then how they behave, and the place in which we provide for them. And it's interesting that we see from a health and well-being perspective, the focus that, the necessary focus on green spaces, on blue spaces, on access to nature. And then when you talk to environmental scientists, and we talk about heat island effects, and we talk about impacts on climate, and you say again how important green is. Then so there are, and sometimes it is that there is a lot of and engineering, sustainable urban drainage. The more green that we have, the more we can deal with the runoff, because the more we pave places, the more runoff we have, the greater likelihood we have of flooding. But all of these industries and all of these disciplines don't know the relevance, so that if we work together on planting more trees, this would actually make all of our jobs easier. But again, you're going to have the unintended consequences where people are going to say, well, it'll affect the foundations of my house if you build this big, if you plant a chestnut. So I've probably gone off tangent there a little, but it's that people don't always understand why they feel better in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was talking today about this in relation to, when we do environmental impact statements for projects. And I remember reading one, I was reviewing one, and under the health, and this was for a motorway project, and under the health aspect of the environmental health or piece, it said the motorway will help ambulances get to the city faster. And that was a sum total of how they saw it for health. You know, they didn't talk about emissions. They did not talk about runoff. They did not talk about, you know, the destruction of biodiversity. You know, they didn't talk about how, like, you know, thankfully things have moved on in Ireland, and we're cutting back on our motorways in a major way. But if we do build motorways, there are underpasses and overpasses for wildlife, you know, and we've bat bridges, you know, we're thinking more about that. But it's not fundamental in our thinking about how the environment focus for health. And so there is that health and well-being in the focus on green. And actually one of the projects that we showcased, and you know, it's doing the rounds, it's such a wonderful project. It's called our Woodlands for Health program here in Ireland. It's run by our Quilcher, who are a National Forestry Association, and Get Ireland Walking, who are an NGO based in Mountaineer in Ireland. But there are recreational walking. They will have our strategy and implementation groups, and so they worked with Mental Health Ireland. So Quilcher, the forestry agency, approached Mental Health Ireland and said, we would love to do a walking in nature program. And they did this program with so these were service users who were basically were suffering from severe mental ill health, and they took them on, I think it was a 12-week walking program in nature. And they evaluated and asked people how did they feel. And so it was literally these people were going for a walk together in the woods. And well, there's loads of really positive responses, but the one that I always mention is the fact that there was, I think it was 82, but it was definitely over 80. I think it was 82% reduction in suicidal thoughts.
Oh my God.
Right. So this is just from walking and talking in nature. And now they say that one of the challenges they have at rolling out the project further is actually because our forests are separated to our urban spaces or where people live, there's a barrier with transport, and particularly if people don't have access to transport, and that's a socioeconomic thing as well. How do we get the people to the spaces in which? We also know that there's a higher amount of green spaces in higher socioeconomic areas. We might have green spaces in some lower socioeconomic areas, but they actually don't have any trees in them. They're just grass, barren lands. Someone in a workshop I once ran said, one of those places where you expect someone to ride up on a horse and steal your purse, you know, the kind of bandit country, he called it. It's good quality green space, and that can be on our streets, and that can, like, you know, in our neighborhoods. But the environment, so that is talking about our mental health and our brain health, but equally our physical health. You know, we want places that are inviting and safe and secure, and separating out safety and security in relation to walking, because security is more of a gendered issue. And you know, that sense of feeling safe, that, you know, you could be, you know, you could have all the green, but if people don't feel safe there, you're counteracting the benefits of that. So, and the social health is another really important part of it. In areas that are more walkable, well, first of all, you know, a study in Toronto have shown there's an 8-year delay in the onset of dementia if you live in a high walkable area. You're more likely to live to be 100 if you live in a high walkable area. And I love to tell this story that where I live in an area which has filtered permeability, we call it, where there's bollards to stop through traffic, but it makes it walkable, like walking and cycling, and, you know, people can pass through the area. But when the bollards went in, there was a lot of kickback from the local community about them, because they just saw them, and also it was the narrative around it on the media and, you know, in local government was a negative. But I was at a meeting and I was, you know, telling him, I just flipped it, because, you know, I was like going, no, this is about your health. And this old lady, I told her all of these benefits, and I was telling her that you're more likely to know people in your area, to chat to people. And there is a lady in the area who every evening at 6 o'clock walks out to her gate so that she meets people who get off the bus on their way home from work and has a chat with them, because they're the only people she meets. She's socially isolated due to her own abilities or inabilities. And this is her opportunity to chat to people, and like that's so important for our health. So I framed the conversation like this, and at the end of it, this woman stood up and she just goes, "Well, all I can say is God bless those bollards." And apparently, she was one of the main people who were fighting against their implementation. So we don't always frame the positives of it, the social connections, so as I say, the social mental health and the physical health, because some people say, oh, places to walk, that's only about fitness. We're investing over €1 million a day in walking and cycling, and we have a slow rollout in some places, and mainly it's because kickback, because people feel like something's been taken from them. But we have to find ways in which we can positively frame this, and how we can show that actually doing this, it also, the more walkable your neighborhood, the more valuable your house is.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Sometimes that's what people need to hear.
No, that's right. I do agree. And I think it does affect people in a number of ways that they may not, be aware immediately about, right? But then, at the end of the day, that what matters, that it affects physical and mental health in a positive way. And so, there is no doubt that, the environment in which events are held also affects, the experience. So I would like to ask, what are some key principles to consider when designing or redesigning an event space?
Yeah. So TU Dublin is Ireland's largest third level institution, but also one of the newest. And that is because we're an amalgamation of three Institutes of Technology is what we were called at the time, but now we're Technological University. And so we held the conference mainly on our main campus in Grange Gorman in Dublin, which used to be a former mental institution, high-walled, closed-off area of the city, which is now being opened up into a permeable space with lots of green. It is a gold standard example of urban regeneration and greening your city and permeability and everything that we were talking about. So we had a new one of our new buildings, which is one of our educational spaces, and like a lot of work has gone into that positive educational space with lots of views of green, but also the concert hall, space was, newly designed and really fabulous, and so that all worked out lovely. But there were a number of things that we did consider. We had quiet rooms, and one of which we had, it was dimly lit, and we had images of nature on a screen, so that when people, because in conferences in particular, you're learning so much. We wanted people to have a space where they could go sit, and be with themselves and just think. But we also had there's a roof garden on this building, so people had an opportunity to go out, but breakout spaces, because now that we're returning to in-person events, almost the networking is almost more important. And, that return to space was to in-person networking was really important. So we left lots of time for people to think and to work together. We did walkshops so that people weren't always sitting. There was a lot of movement. We had different types of spaces. We put an emphasis on good quality food. And we had outdoor seating. We did a stretch tent because of Irish weather. We didn't know it was always going to be dry, and it absolutely poured on us on the Thursday. But it was really important for us, for the delegates, to be in nature, but also experience the city and to experience what we were talking about, and to be together, but have opportunities to take a break and to engage in sessions. And one of my PhD students ran running group in the morning, so if anyone wanted to come and go to the urban parks and get to know, there was another way of networking. We put a particular emphasis on sustainability for this conference as well, and equity. And we understand that international events do come with a carbon footprint, so we did fly our plenary speakers in because we saw a value in them being present, and for those that wanted to attend to be present. But we also streamed the plenaries, but we also recorded all the sessions. And there was there was an opportunity for people to register through an online service that we were able to, so people could pick the sessions that they wanted to watch remotely in real time. We did, we used the Slido app for questions so that you had equal opportunity. So whether you were in the room or whether you were remote, you had the equal opportunity to ask the question. And, so, we recognize that not everyone can travel, and particularly from a gender perspective and then from caring responsibilities, we don't want people excluded from the conversation just because they couldn't physically be there in person for whatever reason. And also the next, so we hosted it in Ireland this year, but next year it's actually moving to the Global South, and it's going to be hosted in Rwanda. And there was a lot of people that wanted to come from Africa, but they couldn't. So, Ireland's not a cheap place to come to. And, we wanted to make sure that they could, again, access the conference. So, there was that, and it was really important that virtual space was a quality experience, and we did invest on a good quality platform so that people felt like they were there, even if they couldn't be physically there. But there is also that there was that in-person experience that to make sure to socialize. And of course we did go dancing, and we went to the Irish pub. We had lots of traditional music. We have to showcase what we are and what we do. But the setting was very important. Yet the setting reflected what we were talking about in the conference, and that was a really important part to experience, because when we were doing any phenomenological studies, we want people to think about what they are doing in the space, and if we are going to be talking about this, we want them to be in a space which reflects the best practice.
I love that you mentioned that you had this space for sitting and reflecting. I find that it's a rare occasion still in events industry where a separate space is given for this particular goal, and also time in the agenda is set so that people have this opportunity to sit and think about what they just learned, because this is important from the psychology perspective. But, it's rarely is considered as an important part of the agenda, because event planners prefer to, to give as much content as possible, because they think that's the main goal of, of creating that experience. While in fact, thinking about what you have learned is equally very important. Otherwise, just people walk off without, remembering much, right? And I was going to, I found this quote about the Walk21 Ireland conference. I was going just to explain, the general what was that about. So it says, this event is an important platform for practitioners, academics, planners, politicians, and citizens to discuss the challenges around walking and how we can reimagine and redesign spaces which are more livable and sustainable for all. And I know that you moderated a session where experts discussed how the built environment affects our physical, social, and mental health. Can you share any takeaways that might be relevant for, event professionals who are now choosing their next destination or venue, or, designing their event space?
Yeah, that was an interesting panel, and when I introduced it, even when I chaired it, it was, I called it a passion panel. It was something that I really wanted to do, because we had a neuropsychologist, we had a physiologist, we had a city planner, we had actually the forester who came up with the Woodlands for Health program, and we had a lawyer from the WHO, from World Health Organization, on this panel. So they were all coming from very different perspectives, but the message was very clear, that whether it is for our physical or mental health, and that it is really important how we design our spaces for our health and well-being. And and the purpose of, we purposely designed the whole program actually around interdisciplinary thinking. We purposely didn't have disciplinary streams through the conference. That if someone was interested in, for example, data and smart cities, there was a path through the conference, but they were going to get exposed to health data, they were going to get exposed to environmental data, they were going to get exposed to physical activity. There was lots of different information, but we purposely wanted that cross fertilization, because people will draw to their own silos. They'll look for the things that are important for them. So look, opportunities to be active, opportunities to pause and reflect, and not have the overwhelm. And as like I had a brain injury myself a number of years ago, and I remember in the recovery phase about getting that overwhelmed, just even going shopping, and how you just like when everything around you is designed to sell and stimulate, how that just can tip you over the edge, Yeah. And that you do need that space to step back. And if you really want to think and engaging at the best from an event, you need to strike that balance.
Mm.
And we had an accessibility was really important to us as well, because our National Disability Authority were one of our stakeholders, one of our advisory committee, and we also know that people will often use disability as a reason why we need more cars, but actually the majority of people with disabilities don't actually get to drive themselves. It's they require other people to drive them places, whereas they can be more independently mobile if the places are more walkable. So again, it was really important for us to make the event as accessible from as many different perspectives as we could as well.
That's very interesting. And so what else, you touched upon this a little bit, but I was wondering what makes an event like this, where walking is the primary format, what makes it feel more inclusive to everyone?
So one of there was a PhD, an early career researcher, PhD student at the conference, who on the last day said to me, I never felt like I was being lectured to, it felt like a conversation. And I thought that was really wonderful, because, we had mayors, we had ministers, we had CEOs of major international companies, we had the World Health Organization and UN Environment in the room, but we also had PhD researchers and local politicians and practitioners, like the engineers. They were all in the room together, and they all felt included. And that was, again, it was a really important thing for us. And that's actually something that the Walk21 Foundation have managed to do so wonderfully with their conference. Like, as I say, with this community, I remember once being at an event and turning and asking the person beside me, I was like, oh, so what do you do? And they were like, oh, I'm a former president of a country. Someone else, I was a mayor of this city. But everyone is on an equal footing, and and I think that's really important, because everyone has a role in shaping our built environment. So they should all feel like they're part of that. And that's a tone that Walk21 Foundation have set, and it was a tone that we also apply within our, we don't, our students are our peers, as I always say, because while we might be, I always say to particularly my undergraduate students, think of me as your boss. We can be friends, but when it comes down to it, you have to listen to me and do what I say, but it's kind of having that same ethos of, it can be like a friendly workplace. There is a hierarchy, but we don't need to see it. We treat people as if it's a flat, right. A flat system.
Right. And another session that got my interest, from Walk21 event was on motivating people to walk. And, for the majority of events, sitting is the default option, right? But it shouldn't be this way. So I wonder what behavioral science solutions you think can be applied to integrate more active formats into event agendas.
Yeah, and this can be difficult to do when you don't know how many people are going to sign up for a session in advance, and with smaller groups, it is very possible. We did a lot of workshopping around flip charts. Like, we had a youth forum with 150 students from around Dublin on the first day. They all travelled by public transport and walked to the venue, and came in and shared their experiences about walking in the city, and some of them from the country as well. So some are rural as well, and there was a lot of up and down, sticking stickers on things, getting down the floor and writing. So they were constantly physically moving. And, if they're kinesthetic thinkers as well, this is the perfect environment for them. They'd be fidgety if they were sitting. But the workshops was a great one because you get, again, coming back to that phenomenological perspective, you get to experience the place and the space and see how you feel there. And, you learn more by being in the environment that's been talked about. And, the Disability Authority, as I said, they got people with blindfolds and canes, so you got to experience what they were talking about. It can be a very difficult one to strike a balance in, but also just even moving between like venues that are relatively close to each other, not being in the one space, engaging with the city in our case, because that was an important part of our conversation, but having the venues close enough that people would walk between them, that they didn't feel the need to, or they could get public transport between them, but they didn't feel the need to have to drive there, so that was an important part of it too.
I love those little nudges that you implemented throughout. And so the workshop format that you just mentioned, I love it, by the way, just, such a great idea. From the organizer's perspective, what worked and what did not with this format?
Okay, that's an interesting one. Now, see, Walk21 Foundation have now 20 years experience in delivering these workshops. And they have done so in every kind of a setting all over the world. So they brought their experience to it. But, what was fundamentally important was there was an interaction with the environment. There's just walking and talking, like just talking for the sake of walking. So walking meetings, for example, that when the topic isn't related to the space in which you're in, it's less engaging. Whereas the workshops that we held, that were using technology for monitoring or for interaction with the space, they were, I mentioned the cane users. They were talking about the history and how an area was opened up. There was one where it was a workshop to a new park, an urban regeneration park in a socially deprived part of the city. So they walked through the area and then got to experience the park themselves, the playgrounds, and they were able to talk about the sensory experiences that have been included in this space in real time in space. So what's important is that it's that you're not just walking for the sake of walking. That it is about being embedded in the place and talking about something that is relevant.
That's an excellent idea, an excellent concept. I love it. And I've got a final round of questions for you. So first is, what would you say is the single one science insight that event professionals should implement immediately?
Science. I think it is that how comfort is key. So when people feel comfortable, they will engage more. They'll have that lower stress. So it is about making people feel like they belong. There's sometimes academic conferences, and I'm careful of saying this as an academic, because I have been an academic in both the engineering disciplines and in the scientific disciplines. I know in the science disciplines in particular that you get hounded when you present at a science conference. Nobody holds back. It is just they question your methodology, they question your process, it's intense. And going from a science faculty into an engineering faculty, when I started questioning the engineering students like that, there was like a bit of a back, like, hold on now. So, we need our researchers to feel comfortable. We need, in particular, we had minority groups come in and present their work that they were doing in community. So our traveller community came in and presented a piece that they did about workshops in the vicinity of where they live. They needed, and they have in general, a low education level as a community. So they needed to feel like that they belonged in that space. So if they had to come in and people started questioning methodologies and questioning and taking that scientific approach, it would not have worked for them. It would have been very exclusionary. So, everyone was treated equally. So that was a bit of a break. We had an academic stream, so people did have to meet an academic requirement if they wanted to take that if they wanted to, like, so that they could say that they had a peer-reviewed paper, which helped them justify coming to the conference. But equally, community groups didn't have to go through such a rigorous process. They got merit to come based on their good ideas and how they implemented it. Because science needs to be more like that. We need to be more inclusive. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so what resources about designing space or impact of the environment would you recommend to event planners?
For events, it's I suppose, like, I would just say, think about your topic and find a suitable space. That if your space does not reflect what it is you're talking about, then the event isn't going to be successful. Like, we did look at big event spaces on the periphery of the city, but they were not what we were going to be talking about, so they were not going to work. I know that they're a great way of getting everyone into one space, and from an event organization, they're easier because you only have to deal with the one space in place, because it got very complex when we started moving around spaces and places. But think about what you're talking about and what is an appropriate space. And the more interesting the space, the more stimulating the conversation will be.
Interesting. Okay, and so my last question is, because the podcast title is What If I Told You, I always ask to complete this sentence with one takeaway relevant to our conversation. So what if I told you?
What if I told you that nobody knows everything, and that we have to design our events where we challenge people's thinking with other perspectives.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Lorraine. That was a great discussion, and I invite everyone to connect with Lorraine on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thank you for tuning in to What If I Told You, the Event Psychology podcast. For more brain science insights and for this episode recap, I invite you to join the Event Psychology Club. Also, if you want to upgrade your skills and get research-based solutions for your events, I invite you to take the Event Psychology Lab online course that I created for event pros like you. That's it for today. Until next time, bye-bye.